Okay, well, it's lovely to be back with you all again this week. Last week, we started with the revelation of God's name to his people, well, to Moses and to the people, and then the Exodus and their journey of faith. And the way I've structured this course is to see the Bible as a journey into the name of God, a journey into the mystery of God. And so today I want to think of that people traveling, as it were, into a new life, a new world, but thinking all the time about who is this strange God that has revealed God's self to them? Yahweh, I am who I am. I will be who I will be. I will be where I will be. Who? And so today we look backwards. Today we look back to thinking of God from the beginning, And so we go back, as it were, in our physical Bible to Genesis. So as the Hebrew slaves journey towards the promised land, they reflect further on their experience of revelation and liberation. The people, the God, Yahweh, look backward to the beginning of things, the beginning of time, and forward to where they might be traveling next. And gradually they come to realize the God, who is I am, must both be the source of everything that is and its ultimate future and end. Now, this is an inspired understanding. This goes beyond the religious thinking of the time and of the nations around about them and their teaching about their local gods. Remember, I talked about how local gods were to a people or a group, even in society. This idea of the Lord of creation, if you like, is an enormous breakthrough in religious understanding and thought. And it's a direct result of them pondering, as they journey on their way, the nature of God. As they walk through difficult places, some very desert-like, they imagine the God, Yahweh, as their creator. They imagine God back in a beautiful, original garden, perhaps inspired by the oases they hope for as they cross the desert. If you ever go in the desert traveling, the one thing you're looking forward to is something like an oasis, water, the coolness of trees, and somewhere to sleep at night, vegetation, if you're lucky, fruit, dates, and so on. There, the God chooses to walk in the cool of the evening. This is in that lovely story, yeah? Amidst the peaceful creatures, in the company of man and his companion. Now, as you, I think probably here you all know, remember I prepared this course for people who know nothing about the Bible, and you all know lots about the Bible. You end up asking me questions I find it difficult to answer. But Genesis has two creation accounts, which themselves demonstrate how the people of the God again and again look backwards and forwards, trying to understand who the I am who I am is and what this God wants of them. At the beginning of St. Mark's Gospel, which is our Gospel for this year, there is an echo of this, which we've heard recently, as Mark thinks of Jesus alone in the wilderness, alone in the wilderness with just the animals and the angels for company, the angels, the mediators of God for company. He's thinking of Jesus as a new Adam, starting to renew the relationship between the God and humanity. The story of creation echoes throughout the Bible, throughout it. It echoes again and again and again in different ways, right till the very last book of the Bible, where the original paradise is restored as a garden city. Yeah? Here at the end of time, God will again dwell in the midst of his reconciled people in a renewed Jerusalem. Chapter 21 of the book of Revelation. Beautiful vision. Well, let me read to you the second in the Bible, second, but I think probably the first to be put together, creation account from Genesis chapter 2, verses 4 to 25. So just relax, and let me read it to you so you've never heard it before. Such was the story of heaven and earth as they were created. At the time when Yahweh God made earth and heaven, there was as yet no wild bush on the earth, nor had any wild plants sprung up. For Yahweh God had not sent rain on the earth, nor was there any man to till it. Instead, water flowed out of the ground and watered all the surface of the soil. Yahweh God shaped man from the soil of the ground and blew breath into his nostrils, and man became a living being. Yahweh God planted a garden in Eden, which is in the east, and there he put the man he had fashioned. From the soil, Yahweh God caused to grow every kind of tree, enticing to look at and good to eat, with the tree of life in the middle of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. A river flowed from Eden to water the garden, and from there it divided to make 4 streams. The first is named the Pishon, and this winds all through the land of Havilah, where there is gold. The gold of this country is pure. Bdellium and cornelian stone are found there too. The second river is named the Gihon, and this winds all through the land of Cush. The third river is named the Tigris, and this flows to the east of Asher. The fourth river is the Euphrates. Yahweh God took the man and settled him in the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and to take care of it. Then Yahweh God gave the man this command: "You're free to eat of all the trees in the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you're not to eat. For the day you eat of that, you're doomed to die." Yahweh God said, "It's not right that the man should be alone. I shall make him a helper." So from the soil, Yahweh God fashioned all the wild animals and all the birds of heaven. These he brought to the man to see what he would call them. Each one was to bear the name the man would give it. The man gave names to all the cattle, all the birds of heaven, and all the wild animals. But no helper suitable for the man was found for him. Then Yahweh God made the man fall into a deep sleep. And while he was asleep, he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh again forthwith. And Yahweh God fashioned the rib he had taken from the man into a woman and brought her to the man. And the man said, "This one at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She is to be called woman, because she was taken from man. This is why a man leaves his father and mother and becomes attached to his wife, and they become one flesh." Now, both of them were naked, the man and his wife, but they felt no shame before each other. So it's lovely, isn't it? So as they journey towards the promised land, the people of God ponder the God, Yahweh, who has called Moses to lead them. They know the ancient stories of Abraham and Sarah, who'd set out in search of the one God. But for so long, they had been surrounded by the gods of the Egyptians and their temples and their priests. This God, I am who I am, is very different from all that they have known. Sometimes they moan against Moses and the journey that the God is leading them on. Yet, in all their trials, the God stands by them, leading them with smoke by day and fire by night, providing food, manna, and water, even from the desert rocks at Meribah and Massa, and safety. As they sit around their fires in the evenings, they ponder their God. Slowly, their inspired thinkers begin to see patterns in their God's engagement with them and with the world. They realize the God, Yahweh, is not like the local gods of Egypt and Canaan. They begin to see the implication that the God is the creator of all lands, all peoples. Their inspired storytellers shape a story from within the world they know. That's the only world they've got. That's the only language they've got to express this daring revelation. Now, this, as you know, is the world of the Nile Delta. It floods every spring, but the flood spreads rich new soil across the whole of the plain. And in the ancient world, it was the breadbasket of the ancient world, of one empire after another, finally with the Romans, who so protected Egypt because it provided the bread that the Romans needed to keep their own people in Italy quiet. So this is the world of the Nile with its red clay, Adama, and the harsh desert, a wilderness searing hot by day and freezing cold at night, where it's easy to get lost and die from lack of water, sustenance, or shame. So they ponder, what did God intend when God created? And they make a brave statement. I quote, "When the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, then the Lord God formed the man out of the dust of the ground and blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being." So much is going on in that little text. Yeah. As God speaks to the people through the words of the inspired storyteller. Adama is the same red clay the oppressed Hebrew slaves turned into bricks to build Pharaoh's pyramids, day after day, week after week, year after year. But here, the very stuff of their oppression, Adamah, the clay, is turned by the hands of God into the living creature, Adam, with whom God chooses freely to speak to and share life with. Isn't that a beautiful interplay there between the stuff of oppression becoming the stuff of the free, liberated creature, God's companion, God's conversation companion. And where does God place Adam? The earthling, you could call him the earthling, the clay thing almost, in a garden in Eden, in the fertile plain of Sumeria, today's Iraq. How different from the desert places they were crossing. God plants a paradise, which in the language of the Sumerians and the Persians is a pleasure garden. This garden is for God, of course. It's God's pleasure garden to which he brings Adam. Okay? This isn't what John Bunyan writes about in Paradise Lost. It's not, we didn't lose our garden. We lost the wonderful garden that God called us to. Yeah? God places the human being within the garden. Now remember, what do you seek as you cross a desert? An oasis with water, trees, and vegetation. God creates Adam as the first gardener in paradise, to nurture this oasis and to learn from it. And then God asks Adam not to tamper with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because its knowledge is destructive and death-dealing. At this point, Adam is God's innocent gardener and God's friend. For companionship for Adam, God creates the animals and invites Adam to name them, to complete them, to carry on God's creation, as it were, by naming them, to take part in God's creative work. At this point, the God, Yahweh, Adam, the earthling, the man, and the natural created world are in a simple relationship of mutuality, or at ease with one another. But the animals are not an adequate helpmate for Adam. So God takes a rib from the sleeping man, in Hebrew ish, and creates Isha, woman. They are naked and without shame, delighting in their simple being together. Well, we all know what happens next. Another creature, the serpent, but notice it is a creature. It's not the power of it's not some evil equivalent to God. We're not talking about two great powers struggling with one another. It's another creature. The serpent tempts them to aspire beyond their beautiful lives, to be dissatisfied. It's what all advertisers do to us, isn't it? All the time. You don't want those pair of trainers, Deacon Bill. You want the latest ones. To be dissatisfied. However, as they gain the knowledge of good and evil by actually committing evil and breaking the law, they unravel the beautiful, ordered reality that the Creator had made them capable of enjoying. He said, no, it wasn't me, it was her. She says, no, it wasn't me, it was a creature. And the beautiful link between God and men and women in creation, all fractures. They lose the simplicity of their relationship with God and with each other and with the creatures and with the very earth itself, which Adam was meant to care for as the first gardener. This inspired story still, I think, speaks powerfully to us today. We're aware of the consequences of human arrogance and greed in our relationships with each other, with the creatures with which we share our planet, who are dying species by species every week. There's never been such a disappearance of species in the history of our planet as in the last 5 years. So we're aware of the consequences of human arrogance and greed in our relationships with each other, with the creatures with whom we share the planet, and with the soil, the forests, the plants, and the oceans which we have polluted. The beautiful balance and order that God brought forth is compromised more than ever in our day, and we are so aware of it, aren't we? So aware of it. And perhaps our children are more aware of it even than us. The new people of God, Israel, moving towards a divinely promised land, would try in that land to build a land where the vision of the divinely inspired storyteller could become real again. It would be a place where the widow, the stranger, and the orphan would always be protected, where food was left for the stranger in their midst, where, where those who fell into slavery were given their freedom every Sabbath year, and so on. For them, the creation accounts became prophecies of what life could be in a renewed and dynamic relationship with their mysterious God. I am who I am. I will be where I will be. After some time, as they began to build that society, they would reimagine the creation in more detail. And this eventually becomes the first part of Genesis and of the Hebrew scriptures, the first chapter, which of course is a much fuller reflection on God as creator. And the storytellers there, perhaps priests in the temple in Jerusalem, now see God's creative work intensely in a week of Acts, a holy week of 7 days, morning and evening, just as the daily round of the temple began with morning and finished with evening prayers and sacrifices. In that story, the resting of God on the seventh day, the Sabbath, hallows the whole work of creation. God enjoys God's creation, and his creatures are to enjoy his creation. On the Sabbath day, no one works. And again, it reminds them of where they've come from. In Egypt, there was no Sabbath. They worked 24/7. Every day of every week of the year, they made bricks to build the Pharaoh's great temples. So the Sabbath is a call to live like a liberated people, a freed people in the midst of creation. But that's a whole other rich story that we could look at another time. Throughout the two accounts of creation at the beginning of the Bible and in the rest of the book of Genesis, each section, because Genesis breaks down into a number of different sections, you've got the first period of time and the early fathers and mothers of the people, and then you've got the different phases of life, right down to the loss of the land. Each section is introduced with the phrase, "This is the story of." These are all primordial stories that speak to us profoundly and truthfully, but from within the shape of story. Yeah? And the inspired storytellers, the narrators, invite us to enter into the stories to which each generation can bring its experience of joy and sadness, peace and war, fear and hope. And you see that throughout the scriptures. Again and again, they will remember at different times in the history of Israel the God of Sabbath, the God of creation. And they will remember what their identity is as a result of that. But to that, they bring their own experience where they are now. So these texts, as God's inspired word, can reshape our awareness in any age and invite us to return to the vision that the Creator continues to offer us. The vision so beautifully echoed much later in the words of the prophet Micah. He has told each of you what is good and what it is the Lord requires of you: to act justly, to love tenderly, and to walk humbly with your God. Again and again, the books of the Bible will echo and reflect the great themes of Genesis. Despite the story of human culpability for sin and the violence of our world, the Bible will still end with a rereading of this story in an ultimate future. There, in that last book of Revelation, will be the final vision of that garden city, a new paradise, a new Eden, flowing with water and blessed with myriad trees, where God will indeed live in the midst of a peaceable people. Again and again, the scriptures remind us that the original blessing of God's creativity is always greater than the original human sin, always. With its real but limited consequences. May we discover that to be so in our lives, in our time. Yeah. Okay, well, that's my little spiel for today. And I think if we have a little break, go to the toilet or make a cup of tea, and just take time to mull over some of this. In the notes, I just suggest a reflection, but not so much for now, but for later on, that if, again, during the week, maybe take a little time to reread the creation account and try and see what it is that holds you in peace with those around you, with the plants, the creatures, the whole planet. And maybe try and see, can you work out how this peace sometimes does break down, and what's the suggested remedy? So that's for the week, I think. But Father, do you want to give us a time to come back, and we'll have a little chat and then a prayer?
Okay, let me just stop recording.